Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll be talking about overreaction in Ohio, inflation, outlaw crayfish, the Downsizer Dispatch, and a whole lot more. All coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV. It is episode 122, and it's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
And we have a ton of stories to get to from all across the United States. I think we're sticking inside the U.S. borders this week, but we do have a lot of just asinine stories about how the government is screwing stuff up. And we are going to start off with some overreactions coming out of Ohio, and not the same parts of Ohio, but parts of Ohio, and these are coincidentally, the stories aren't even related. But the first two stories I wanted to get to are just some governmental overreactions, and these things would not be happening if it wasn't for the government being in charge and sometimes having these knee-jerk, trigger-happy reactions. The first one is coming out of Whitehall, Ohio, where an old woman, an 84-year-old woman by the name of Virginia Dodson, was she was in a Walmart parking lot sitting in the car. Now, Virginia is an 84-year-old woman who has Alzheimer's disease, and she is taken care of by her adult child. But her adult child went in the store that day, and she got very confused while sitting in the car. And after worrying and wondering what's going on, she found herself a knife and cut herself free from the seatbelt. And then she found herself in the even scarier Walmart parking lot. Now, walking along with her cane and a bag and then this knife that she used to cut herself off, police were quickly called. And their response, well, I'm going to let you guys take a look because, I'm just one person. Let's get your opinion on it and see what you think the police reaction should be for an 84-year-old confused woman wandering around the parking lot, even if, yes, she is carrying this knife. But what should the police be doing? Let's take a look at the video.
Find this right here. When they put it that's the old thing. It'd be like beating up on an 87-year-old woman. The motherfuckers out here with their camera phone up.
So what do you think, Nick? Overreaction, 84-year-old Alzheimer's patient wandering around a parking lot. Yes, she is brandishing a knife, and I was looking at some of the comments up on YouTube. This video is up on YouTube, and it is a longer version of it. We'll have it posted on the show notes on our forums at freemindstv.com if you want to see the entire 7-minute video. That's just a clip of it. But a lot of the commenters were saying she was wielding a knife. The police had to take her down, and all force is necessary. You can pound an old 84-year-old grandma who has Alzheimer's disease, pound her face into the pavement. There's nothing wrong with that. She should obey the police. What do you think, Nick? Overreaction, or am I just being too hard on the cops here?
It doesn't seem like she was moving all that fast, so it seems to me that they could have overpowered her without actually throwing her to the ground, which would just be taking the knife away from her.
Her bones looked like they were made of dust.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been probably like taking the knife away from a small child. I mean, she was moving so slowly. Granted, if you don't know how somebody's going to react, you might be nervous about trying to make that grab, but it was an overreaction.
Yeah,
certainly. And I don't understand the reason for all the backup.
Did they had, I think 7 more squad cars showed up after the initial takedown.
I mean, did they think she had some kind of an assault weapon in the car too?
Well, that's why we're titling these first stories are overreaction, because a first overreaction by the police of taking her down and shoving her face into the pavement until there's blood everywhere, and then an overreaction by bringing 7 more squad cars into the loop as well. I guess to disperse the crowds. I guess people were a little bit upset about how they were treating this old lady. So I don't know. I wasn't there, so maybe the backup was justified, but to me it just seems like a little bit of an overreaction. But
maybe more than a little bit.
We would like to get your comments if you feel differently. fmtv@freemindstv.com. All right, moving right along to another part of Ohio, where thousands of J.P. Morgan Chase employees were evacuated from their place of work at the McCoy Center in Ohio because of a timing device. Yes, an employee reported a suspicious looking device, and police were called in. The fire personnel were called in, and the police and the fire department evacuated the entire building of thousands of people. Well, there were some people taken to the hospital, but it wasn't because of the device. It was just a simple timing device used in presentations. It does have some scary looking lights on it, a few wires, and even a timer. It's used in presentations. One light goes off when there's 2 minutes left, another one when there's 1 minute, and then the timer buzzes when all's up. You know, like the timers you might have in your kitchen. Well, some people thought that we need to evacuate the whole building for this, even though it's a device that's commonly used. The people who were taken to the hospital were taken because of the overreaction. They had to spend hours out in the hot sun, and there were several people who were treated for heat exhaustion. So yes, it did create panic, it did create chaos, but only because of the overreaction.
Well, and here's a little hint for people who want to work on a bomb squad or report suspicious packages. Usually when a terrorist or somebody who wants to bomb a building is going to make a bomb, they're not going to put flashing red lights on it to tell you when it's about to blow up. That's something you see in Hollywood movies, but think about it. Is that something that a terrorist bomber would actually do? I can't see why they would take the time to wire up a light to tell people that this thing was about to explode. That would kind of defeat the purpose and tip them off to the fact that there's a bomb in the building.
This reminds me, a couple of years ago, I remember we reported on it. It might have been before you were on the show, but Aqua Teen Hunger Force, it's a comedy show on Adult Swim, a cartoon. They came out with a movie, and they put up these, what they call Moonanites, and they were little LED flashboards, and they put them up as advertising throughout some places in Boston, and people called in the bomb squad. They evacuated whole sections of Boston, costing millions and millions of dollars, essentially shutting down the city of Boston for over a day because of flashing LED light boards of a cartoon figure.
Yeah, and they also blew these figures up, and I find it hard to believe that we reported on this story, and it's so old news at this point. They were trying to charge the people who put them up as if, you know, it was a terrorist, you know, attack or something like that, when really the people who didn't get what the billboards were just really weren't up with pop culture, and that's it. And I imagine some police actually did have an idea what these Moonanite characters were. They just didn't want to say anything. Flashing
LED cartoon characters and simple timing devices. Well, I guess calling the bomb squad because we are a reactionary society. Doom and gloom everywhere. You know what? People need to just take a chill pill, calm down a little bit, take a deep breath. Things will be okay, I promise. All right, moving right along, though, moving on to a time where things were not okay, and getting into an update article, you have some news about Katrina, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and some of the aftermath that followed with actually some what may be murders by police officers.
Yep, and now nearly 4 years after one of the more famous police shootings that took during Hurricane Katrina that took the lives of Ronald Madison and James Brissett on New Orleans Downsizer Bridge, the FBI has actually raided the New Orleans Police Department's homicide squad. The reason that they do these kinds of things is if they believe that evidence is about to be destroyed. At least that's what Harry Rosenberg said, who's a former U.S. attorney, and he says it's done very rarely, but only when the FBI believes that a police department is going to destroy or alter evidence in some way because they're aware of a criminal investigation. And it seems to send the message that the FBI has some information that leads them to believe that, yes, these were unjustified shootings, and yes, the New Orleans Police Department is corrupt enough to cover the whole thing up, which doesn't speak very well for the actual professionalism and the way that police abide by the law, especially in New Orleans. And there are two different versions of the shooting. Victims of the shooting claim that the police officers simply opened fire on them. Apparently the police officers were responding to a radio call that they had gotten saying that there were officers in distress on the bridge. The police, however, claim that they were being shot at. Who knows how much you can believe that, though, Toby? I mean, the police were claiming they were being shot at all the time. I remember when Hurricane Katrina, the aftermath was going on, the reporting coming out made it sound like New Orleans was a war zone. But for the most part, and something that was pointed out after the fact, was that a lot of the gunshots were people trying to get help to come to them. And that's
essentially like flares, right?
That's what's in most parts of the world. If you have a disaster and you hear gunshots, especially a series of 3 gunshots, that means help me. I'm over here. I'm on a roof. I can't get off.
It makes sense, but of course the police went ahead and confiscated guns, knocking on doors.
The National Guard did as well.
I mean,
completely
just
illegal.
So much sickening stuff coming out of Katrina, and is there more to this story?
Well, there are other murders. I mean, there were separate incidents involving one police shooting and one suspicious body that was found in a burned-out car. The owner of the car says that the last time he saw it, it had been confiscated by police. And after the fact, they found a dead body who had been shot in the car, and the car was burned out. So, and that was, the police were misbehaving in all kinds of ways. They helped themselves to goods at Walmart at the same time they were cracking down on looters. They were doing the same thing.
Right, and it just goes to show that I don't want to paint all police officers with the same brush, because there are really good police officers out there. But what this does show is that they still are human. They're not above all of us. Like some people think that above the law, they are better humans than us. They know right from wrong, and only they can do what's right. No, when push comes to shove, they are humans too, and they mess up and they make mistakes all the time. And just because they have a shiny badge and what some people would call a really cool costume on, doesn't make them better than us. So, I mean, police officers are human too, and it's very important to know that. They are not infallible, even though some people think that they are.
Now, unfortunately, they seem to get away with a lot of stuff that regular citizens don't.
Right, and such as this. But who knows? I mean, we'll see.
The FBI has done these raids, so actually, there is a decent chance that somebody is going to be brought up on charges.
Yeah, and we will report on that as new news comes out. But for now, it's time to let people know how they can contact those foolish people in Washington, D.C. that call themselves representatives, and let them know how they feel about the issues.
Yeah, and well, I think with the healthcare debate, we've seen just how much most of the representatives in Washington actually want to hear from you on the issues.
They don't want to hear at all.
We had an incident here
only
in
if you agree with them.
Yeah, we had an incident here in Keene and one up in Grafton, New Hampshire, where the representatives of the Congress people really didn't want to hear from constituents, even though they said they did. But you can still send them a letter. I think it does do some good. Politicians do tend to want to run out in front of a parade. They want to be on the positive side of public opinion most of the time because, well, they come up for re-election. Most of them would like to keep holding the office that they are currently holding, or they'd like to run for higher office. So if they feel like what they're doing is unpopular, they might change what they're doing. They probably won't change what they're doing just because it's wrong. And most Americans don't want a national ID card, which brings us to the issue at hand here for this week. Nevertheless, the Real ID Act is still on the books. I think it's over 25 states now, most states in the union, on some level saying that they will not comply with all the requirements of this act, and many states saying they're not going to help at all. But that act still hasn't been repealed. Now, there is some talk of doing this on Capitol Hill, but the idea is to replace the Real ID Act with the Pass ID Act. And Pass ID is just a watered-down version of Real ID. So if you don't want the Real ID program, you don't want a national ID, it's important that you not only tell your representatives to repeal the Real ID Act, but to replace it with nothing. And you can do that at DownsizeDC.org.
And as we've reported on every week, there are a number of other great issues that you can get involved in besides that. So DownsizeDC.org, in my opinion, one of the last hopes for the federal government. I mean, they have some bills that if they passed, could rein in the federal government, but other than that, I say we're better off without them.
Yeah, and they've made some progress, at least getting some of their ideas into the discussion with things like the Read the Bills Act, the Write the Laws Act, and for people who are new to the show, I'm sure we'll talk about it again. So, or you can go to DownsizeDC.org if you want to read about them right now. They're very simple laws that would require Congress to do the things, in the bill title, to actually read the bills before voting them into law, and to actually write all of the laws that Americans are expected to follow. In many cases, the laws we're expected to file, they're written by unelected bureaucrats.
Yeah, it's all foolish. You're foolish, Nick. We could never pass all the laws if we had to read them and write them ourselves. Anyways, moving right along, it is time for us to take a short break. But when we come back, police pulling over people who are trying to make their way to a funeral procession, inflation, desert lobsters being illegal in Nevada. All that and a whole lot more. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV. What is he doing? Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by Life Productions for your basic and semi-pro video production needs. From full wedding and event coverage to DVD authoring and distributions, lifeproductions.com. That's lyfproductions.com.
Thank you, Spencer.
This is Mark Edge from Free Talk Live, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. It is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
We'd like to invite you to log on to freemindstv.com. That's our website. From there, there's not only archives of the TV show, the radio show, blogs, ways to help the show, and a whole lot more, all up at freemindstv.com. And we also have the member side up there. Tons of bonus content, only $3 or $30 a year really helps out the show. But we do have a lot of articles to get to, so let's not take too much time plugging ourselves. Moving right along, I wanted to get into an article here, Nick, about some people who are trying to make their way to a funeral procession. This coming from Spokane, Washington, where Donald Ross's sister had passed away, and more than 100 people were in a procession trying to get to the cemetery for the burial. Well, what's his name? Ross's car was pulled over, and the 5 people inside were given tickets for, yes, not wearing their seatbelts during the procession. Now, this is the part of the procession where everyone's following real slow with their headlights on, sometimes with their flashers going, to make sure people aren't getting in between them as they go from the church to the cemetery. Yet, a police officer had the cojones to pull out one of the cars because the occupants inside were not wearing seatbelts. Not only that, when they were said, "I'm going to my sister's funeral, she's getting buried right now," he didn't let them go. He made them sit there while he wrote all 5 people citations. And no apologies. The useless bureaucrats said that they're out here trying to prevent funerals, not disrupt them. So while they did disrupt the funeral, it's okay as long as they're preventing others. Now, Nick, tell me this. Do you think that people in these funeral processions, they're going short distances? Do you think they're going at great speeds where they can smash each other to bits and all die on the way?
Probably not.
If it's not for the police officers interrupting it, most people are very respectful of funeral processions. Not only that, but I am a true believer in the fact that it's your life, and if you want to be stupid and not wear your seatbelt, well, you have the right to do so, and it's not the government's job to say, "Oh, buckle up, be careful, don't slip on the ice out there, you better do everything, be safe with everything." And of course, most states completely disagree with us. Everywhere except New Hampshire, where we're broadcasting from in the United States, does require people to buckle up when they're behind the wheel.
And I think New Hampshire is one of the last places in what most people would call the developed world that doesn't have a seatbelt law. There's probably a bunch of
people still call it the
don't.
free world, yet you're not.
Yeah.
You have to wear a seatbelt.
Not
and
so
pulling
free.
people over during a funeral procession, God, heartless. And they did miss the burial. They missed everything. Police officers, unapologetic. They're doing their jobs out there, Nick. They can't just be giving warnings and sending people on their way. They can't let this one
They
slide.
wouldn't get any money if it wasn't for that.
God, it just makes me want to throw up. But Ross says he is planning to fight this, but the law is the law. We can't make any exceptions. What they need to do is throw these laws out the window. You know what? What if a police officer said, "You know what? I can have some discretion when I enforce these laws. I'm going to go after real bad guys. Instead of pulling people over who are on their way to the funeral and telling them to buckle up, I'm going to go after some bad guys and try to solve a crime." There's crimes out there, police officers. You can go solve them. People are actually being raped, murdered. People are being robbed from. Not all those crimes are solved. And until each and every one of them is solved, I want you to stop going after innocent people who haven't hurt anybody and harassing them. That people will like you more. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's a pretty good thought. And the fact is, not all violent crimes are solved. In fact, a lot of them go unsolved. A lot of murders, a lot of rapes, a lot of robberies, arson. There's plenty of real crimes out there where police officers could be focusing their efforts. We probably wouldn't need as many police officers if it weren't for all of these vice crimes, all of these nanny state laws. Honestly, we could probably do a much better job with fewer officers, but we would be far better off. I think we would have a far safer society, and a far freer society.
And we'd also have a society where people were a little bit more respectful towards the police. Right now, police get very little respect, especially from the younger generations. Well, why is that? Because most people have a friend or a family member they know that have been harassed by police officers when they haven't hurt a soul. And I'm not just talking about speeding tickets and being pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt, but I'm talking about enforcement of vice crimes. And how about the way the police conduct themselves? What happened to peace officers? My dad tells me about peace officers, where police officers were there to keep the peace and help people out. Now they're law enforcement officers, enforcing the law, because you citizens couldn't do it without us. Anyways, we do need to move along, Nick. I know that you've got an article about inflation, and you know that I've been listening to the radio, and they say that they're going to be pulling all that money that they just injected into the economy out before it causes all my dollars in my wallet to be worth much less. Do you think they'll do it?
Well, let's talk about what analysts think and people who do, watch what the Federal Reserve does for a living. This coming from Market Watch. And even though some Federal Reserve officials and market participants want the party to end, by party they mean cheap money that the Fed's injecting into the economy, the central bank is going to keep the punch bowl full after its two-day meeting this week. Now, we're recording this show just before the meeting. This program's going to air right after the meeting. But generally, the expectation is the Fed's not going to change a whole lot. They've got easy money policies on the books. They've got very artificially low interest rates, very close to zero. And they're not going to get rid of any of that, at least not yet. The argument coming from the Federal Reserve is we need to inject all this easy money into the system to help, ease the unemployment rate, get the market working
Well,
again.
they do if they're not going to allow the system to flush itself out, Nick. I mean, the way that they've set things up, the way that they've been controlling the economy, they've built this big old house of cards. And unless they're propping it up and kicking the can down the road by injecting more money into the system, more government programs that got us into this mess in the first place, unless they're doing that, it will come tumbling down, and they will have to flush out the system, and we'll have to find the true bottom of the economy before it gets built back up. So in a sense, they are correct, aren't they?
Well, yeah. I mean, if they did nothing, the economy would find its own natural market bottom. And then
because it's
start
been
building back up
artificially
from there.
propped up.
It's been artificially propped up by policies of mostly the Federal Reserve. And I wanted to point out, a lot of people are saying, well, hey, give them some credit. What they're doing is working. The unemployment rate's starting to go down, so we're seeing signs of recovery.
So would it work for me if I didn't get enough money from my job and I went and used my credit card for as long as I could? I could be rich. I could buy out everything. I mean, I've got like a $20,000 limit, Nick. I could go out and I could spend and I could spend and I could spend, and I could get another credit card and spend and spend and spend. And everyone around me would think I was rich. I would have all this stuff. I could go get new cars. I could just be making, you can get a car for $100 payment, right? I could have flat screen TVs. I could have all this really cool stuff. And everyone would say, it's working. Look at, he's buying stuff. He's a contributing member of the society. It works, Nick. What's wrong with you? You want them to stop doing that?
Oh, yeah. And one of the reasons why
I don't know about that.
Well,
I like my flat screen TVs, and I like my shiny new car, and I like my, I guess lobsters dipped in prices, but I like my caviar. I like those nice things.
What they're doing is they're setting up a scenario where when they suck this money back out of the system, they could easily trigger a second shock to the economy that would push it back into another government-caused recession. And I just wanted to point out what they've done so far hasn't been as successful as the government's trying to spin it. A lot of people are saying that the unemployment rate edged down to 9.4%. Well, it did, but the unemployment rate, the official government unemployment rate, has nothing to do with 9.4%, with that number that they throw out there. Because it doesn't count people who have been unemployed for so long that they've given up looking for a job.
Or they're off the government dole. So it does mean something. It means they're no longer getting money from the government. They're no longer collecting on an unemployment check.
But the figures I've heard put the real unemployment rate at something, people who don't have jobs, who would like to have jobs, but they're no longer counted in the government metrics, at something more like 15% for a national average. That's much closer to, say, a depression-level unemployment rate than this piddly 9.4%. And it's because the government is manipulating the way they calculate the unemployment rate. They haven't always calculated it the same way. And when they want the economy to look like it's doing better, they just can adjust the way that they're accounting for this stuff.
Yeah, they're also...
And that's part of the way we got into this problem is people just changing the way we account for things in the in the middle,
Right.
in midstream,
I
and
wanted
passing it off as the same.
I wanted to point that out too. I mean that when you're looking at the governmental inflation numbers, they're going to be much, much lower than they actually are, depending, because they just go for products that are stagnant. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to what they're doing. There's no book of things that they look at.
They change
the price of milk and bread and gas and the price of
change it
everything
every
together and what
time.
it is. It's whatever is staying stable. They look at that, or the most stable items in the economy.
And if one
they
of them goes up,
adjust that.
they'll
Exactly.
make changes. They'll
They'll
say,
cut
well,
it off.
the economy's bad, so now you don't buy steak, you buy hamburger.
Right.
And hamburger is still as cheap as steak used to be, so there's no inflation. But prices of steak have gone up, so it's absolutely
adjusting
absurd.
the numbers and playing
It's
with them.
lying.
But we will talk about this more. I've got one more article I want to get to in only a few minutes. I want to talk about desert lobster, or known as crayfish. But in some parts of the country, Nick, it is illegal to sell. This article coming from Nevada, where there is 24-hour liquor, 24-hour prostitution. What else do they have? 24 hours. 24-hour gambling. It's all legal there. But if you want to go and get yourself a desert lobster, well, you better look someplace else. And this is the story of Bob and Pam Eddy, who have been fighting this battle for 14 years to try to sell desert lobster at their the roadside stand in the town of Mena in Nevada. Never heard of it, probably because only 200 people live there. But the authorities are serious about preventing them from selling their crawfish. Yes, they have, over their 14-year battle, they have had many run-ins with the state of Nevada. They have even had their place raided with men by men with guns, with the whole body armor, the mace and all that stuff, kicking down their door, coming in, taking those crawfish. They not only poison them, but then they dump their bodies in the desert. Top it all off, you know, like nice benevolent government folks. After that, he decided to go the legal route. He said, civil disobedience isn't for me. What I really want to do is I want to sell crawfish, so I'm going to stop selling them illegally, and I'm going to go through the proper distribution methods to sell my crawfish. And he took it all the way to the legislature. Many, many times, in fact. And every time they said, no, you cannot sell your desert crawfish, because what if someone, instead of cooking their crawfish like they should, they take it and they let it go in a stream? And what if it eats other fish? The whole world could go out of balance. Not to mention that you can buy these crawfish from the pet store, and that would be much more likely than someone buying a crawfish from a roadside stand and letting it go in the brook.
And
But it's a worry, Nick. It's a worry.
I don't want it to mean the idea that some species, if you release them, can be very destructive. Usually after a while, if they're a non-native species, things kind of balance out again. But you can buy these same crayfish at a pet shop and put them in your aquarium. I think it's much more likely that somebody's going to release a pet if they can no longer keep their aquarium than release their dinner.
Yeah, I'm not going to pay $14 a pound for crawfish, because that's, I guess, what it was going for at his stand. I'm not going to be paying $14 a pound for my desert lobster and then go release it into the brook. I'm going to eat it. But anyways, we're out of time for tonight. If you have different opinions or the same opinions from what we have, send it to us. fmtv@freemindstv.com is the email address. freemindstv.com is the web address where you can get everything Free Minds TV and Free Minds Media related. And until next week, it's been Toby here with you, and over here.
Over here, it's Nick.
It's Nick. Have a great night. Fade to black.